Can't approve overtime? Okay, I'll just leave early on Friday. For background, this took place in the 1990s when a T1 1.5 megabytes per second data connection would run you over $500 a month. And only the phone company and a few very large data-centric companies would even dream of having a T3, 43 megabytes per second. I was working for one of those telephone companies in the central office, where we provisioned and troubleshot those very lucrative services. There were 4 people in my department, making it one of the larger such offices in the state. One day, there was one person on vacation, another one out of the office for some other reason, and Tech 3 called in sick. I was alone for 8 hours with the workload of 4 technicians. Well, as a good employee, I prioritized and got all the trouble tickets done, and all of the most urgent new services installed. Everything due that day was done. But in the process, I missed my 2 15-minute breaks and worked through lunch. My supervisor came down at the end of the day to congratulate me for my good work, and he was watching me fill out my timesheet for 9 hours. He started to get a little panicky and said he couldn't approve overtime. He would get in trouble. I reminded him that I had just spent 9 hours doing the work of 4 people, 32 hours worth of work, but he said it wasn't approved. I said, what can we do then? I worked it, I need to get paid. He suggested I leave an hour early on Friday, so I agreed. Come Friday, I decided to take full advantage and only take a half-hour lunch so I could leave at 3:30 instead of 4. Well, guess what? The vacationer and the sick person had not returned, so it was just the 2 of us. The other person disappeared at 1:30 or so. I found out later she was interviewing for a management position. At 3 o'clock, I got paged for a ticket on one of those very expensive T3s down hard. I was to join a conference bridge to assist in troubleshooting. I joined the call, then at 3:25, I said, sorry, I have to drop off. I'm not approved for any overtime. The night shift person will be here in a half hour to help. I dropped off knowing the night person on duty had never worked on a T3 before. I hadn't even reached my car when the pager started blowing up. Overtime is approved, please stay on. But I had already clocked out, and so I just smiled and got into my car, drove home, and took my wife out for a long overdue date night. Funny how overtime can't be approved, but when there's an emergency, it gets approved instantly. Good on OP for just driving home, even after it got approved. Life shouldn't be all about work, and I'm sure his wife agrees. My father versus the Homeowners Association. I'm a little fuzzy on exactly when this was, but for loose context, it's 2018-ish. We're living in this little 2-story in a subdivision in upstate California, which my parents still own. My family just had a full run of renovations done on the house. Kitchen remodel, new floors, wallpaper removed, new paint on the walls, etc. The folks who painted did an especially good job, and since they were a small local business, they wanted to know if they could put a little sign in our yard for a few days as advertisement. You know, those little plastic type yard signs, nothing big or fancy. My dad was happy to oblige and showed them where to put it to avoid the sprinkler system. Everything's great. 2 days later, a letter arrived in our mailbox. It's from the HOA, Homeowners Association. According to the bylaws, no signage can be placed in a yard for more than 24 hours. We hadn't been planning to leave it up more than a few days, maybe a week at the most, but to be told that supporting a small business was an eyesore came well out of left field. This is the part where I tell you that my father, despite being a very considerate and respectful man, has something of a problem with authority, especially when that authority is arbitrarily telling him what to do on his own property. First thing he does is pull out his copy of the neighborhood bylaws. He and my mother both look over it, and lo and behold, the quoted passage does indeed state that no signage or similar mode of advertisement is to be displayed in a yard for more than 24 hours. Not one to go down quietly, my father took to combing through the applicable section, looking for any loophole he he could find, and he found it in the word yard. 2 or 3 days after that, one of the ladies who worked for the HOA came down to our house to personally ask us to remove the sign. She and my dad stepped out on the front porch, and must have been there for nearly half an hour. I don't think I heard him say anything other than the occasional mm-hmm or yes ma'am until the very end. See, the sign was no longer in our yard. It was in the flower bed. Other parts of the bylaws, even in the cited section, distinguished the flower bed as separate from the yard. And since this particular clause mentioned the yard alone, the flower bed must have been fair game. And he told this, honestly quite nice woman as much, without so much as knitting his brows or raising his voice. The sign stayed in our flower bed, perhaps out of spite, for nearly another month before we finally took it down. I feel like most HOA stories on here just go horribly wrong, but this one actually went pretty smoothly. I hope more people act like this out there in the world. You know, no yelling, no name calling, just a nice, reasonable discussion. Do not keep things on your desk, even if you don't know what they are. Back about 8 to 10 years, I was in an automation and controls position within the maintenance department. We were basically in charge of making sure launch equipment was up to our standards, modifying current fixtures, PLC/vision programming, etc., etc. So we always had crap on our desks. Parts, pieces, and yes, even some junk. One day, upper management comes through and completely eviscerates the entire maintenance department for how it looks. Now, keep in mind, this maintenance area looks better than 90% of the places I've been through, and I've seen a lot. The other part is that, yes, we have crap sitting around, but it's because you don't just throw a 12,000-pound fixture up on a table. We kept as clean as possible is what I'm saying. Our group had a separate weekly meeting with the manager, outside of the normal maintenance meeting. This week, we could tell the big guy was uncomfortable. There are 4 of us in my group. Myself and Tim, alias, are considered the 2 heads of the team. He admittedly is a better PLC programmer, but I'm a trained machinist too, so we could do some pretty cool stuff. Anyway, the boss starts out by bringing up the audit, how terrible we did, and what management thinks we need to do better. Same speech we got at the full maintenance meeting. He then specifically singles Tim and myself out, or I suppose management did. He proceeds to tell us that our desks need to have nothing more than our personal property, laptops, in-repair items, items we need to research, and new items that are part of a project that has a work order. We were actually told management was so upset we needed to double our 5S score by next month, or it may affect our raise. He ends by saying, "I bet you don't know what half that crap on your desk is." I do. "And if you don't, no one else does. You need to get rid of every last thing on your desks that is not part of projects you're working on. Everything up there should have a work order." Understood. We wiped everything. Test boards, HMIs, servos, drives, one-off details, everything. Most of this stuff we would fix in our spare time while we were bored, but oh well. Also, keep in mind, launch engineers are constantly dropping things on our desks. So, quote, we can try it out. So, Monday, everyone can tell we're irked. Still did our job, but if you want by the book, you got it. The next morning, Tim comes in and there's a brand new Keyent safety scanner sitting on his desk. He looks at his computer and asks me, "You doing a safety scanner?" It's nothing I knew of, so I say no. He chucks it in the trash, says, "No work order, no idea what it is. They said it goes." I followed suit, and we did that with everything we didn't know about for a week before the first question hit. "Did you get a chance to mess with that scanner?" "Scanner?" "Safety scanner I set on your desk." "Oh, hey, I figured out the scanner. Yeah, sorry, but it went in the trash. Management said we can't keep anything that doesn't have a work order, and I didn't know anything about it." I don't know exactly how things went down from there. We were rewarded with private project cabinets so our desks could stay clean. Engineering never once dropped anything off without us knowing again. My boss quit talking to us for 6 months. It really seems like an overall win. I feel like this is a perfect example of don't fix something that isn't broken. If the system works, don't change it. Sure, it's a little messy, but if everything gets done on time, does it matter? Sure, I'll say something. I work in security for a major US manufacturer, which, despite all its flaws, is a much better job than any I've held in the past. After I was hired, my manager warned me that HR has an outsized role in the company compared to others I may have encountered. I haven't necessarily noticed this myself, but I've only been with the company for a short time. Regardless, I always take HR concerns to heart, because I like this job and don't want to jeopardize it. Now, the strangest thing about this job, to my mind, is that employees do not have access to the company's policies. I have asked for a copy of the employee policy manual more than once, and have been repeatedly told that such a thing doesn't exist. One day, I was working at the front security desk when the HR manager, Karen, not her real name, but real temperament, approaches and starts chatting with me. Everything was pleasant until an employee entered the building wearing pajamas. Karen starts fuming and tells me that I need to go say something to the young lady about her pajamas. I ask why, and Karen turns her anger towards me with, "Because it's against company policy and I said so." Okay, got it, no problem. I go and flag down the young lady and tell her, "Those pajamas look very comfortable, but the HR manager would like to have a word with you about them," and point to Karen. I go back to my chair and the young lady approaches Karen, who is acting flabbergasted that she's going to have to deal with this. Karen manages to mumble her way through telling the young lady that her clothes are inappropriate and against policy. The young lady asks to see said policy. The pair head back toward, presumably, the HR offices, and I go back to whatever it was I was doing. The next day, my big boss, who is my manager's manager and is about 3 levels higher than Karen in the corporate structure, calls me into his office and asks why Karen wants me written up for insubordination. Having only had one interaction with Karen that day, I tell him about what happened. He basically tells me not to worry about anything, that he will handle it, and that I will not be written up. The next day, the security office and every security post has a memo posted from my big boss. I don't remember it word for word, but the gist of it said, "We are paid to handle security and emergencies only. We do not handle policy enforcement. If you are approached about a policy violation, you are to direct that person to their manager or to HR." I've only seen Karen a few times since that day, but every time I have, she has flat out ignored me. What an odd encounter. Like, in what world does the HR manager think, "Oh, you, random security guard, enforce this policy for me that you've never seen before"? I guess I just don't understand some people's way of thinking. But I think if you made it this long into the video, you've enjoyed it. So I'd appreciate it if you press the like button. And I will see you next time.